My name is Daniel. I am 47 years old. And until that afternoon in Austin, I believed I was a man who mattered inside his own home. The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock. A routine discussion, they said. Academic performance. A minor disciplinary concern. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that couldn't be handled by adults sitting around a polished table pretending everything was under control. I left work early to be there. That detail matters to me more than it will ever matter to Chloe. I remember the drive across town, the heat rising from the asphalt, the familiar stretch of highway I'd taken dozens of times for games, rehearsals, award ceremonies. I had sat in those same school chairs clapping for her achievements. I had written checks to keep her in that building. Tuition wasn't small. Neither were they voluntary contributions. I paid them without complaint. I told myself this is what stability looks like. I parked, straightened my jacket, and walked inside as if I belonged there, because I believed I did. The conference room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and overbrewed coffee. Posters on the wall preached values. Leadership, integrity, responsibility. Words printed in cheerful fonts, framed like commandments. Laura sat beside Chloe when I entered. My wife, 6 years married. She gave me a tight smile. The kind that says, "Be calm. Let's not make this worse." Chloe didn't look at me. 16 years old. Brilliant. Sharp-tongued. Beautiful in that effortless way teenagers are. She inherited her father's eyes, Ryan's eyes. The man who lives in Florida and appears in our lives like a seasonal storm. Quick visit. A few photos. A transfer that covers half of something and none of the rest. I covered the rest. The principal began gently. There had been an incident on a recent school trip. Chloe had skipped a required seminar. She'd signed out without permission. Nothing criminal. Just defiant. Just careless. The school required a parental acknowledgement and a discussion of consequences. I listened. I nodded. I asked measured questions. I wasn't there to dominate. I never was. Then the principal turned toward me with professional politeness. "Mr. Hayes, as her guardian, how would you like to proceed?" It was an ordinary sentence. Administrative. Procedural. I opened my mouth to answer, and Chloe cut in. "He's not my dad, he doesn't get a say." No shake in her voice. No teenage tremor. Just clarity. The sentence landed softly. That was the cruelty of it. She didn't spit it. She didn't shout. She simply stated it as fact. Like correcting a typo. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. The room went still. Even the air conditioning seemed to hesitate. Laura shifted in her seat. "Chloe," she whispered. But it was weak. A reflex, not a correction. Chloe didn't look at me. She looked at the principal. As if I were already erased. In that moment, I understood something I had refused to see for years. I had been functioning as infrastructure. Invisible. Necessary. Replaceable. I had paid the down payment on the house outside Austin. A quiet suburb with manicured lawns and respectable neighbors. For bedrooms. 2-car garage. A backyard big enough for Mason to kick a soccer ball. My name on the mortgage. My credit securing their comfort. I paid private school tuition, Chloe's especially. The arts program. The advanced classes. The fees that arrive quietly but consistently. I paid insurance. Health, auto, home. I paid for Mason's camps in the summer so Laura could work without worrying. When Chloe wanted to try a competitive program in New York, I researched it. Budgeted it. Agreed to it. I never asked to be called dad. I told myself love doesn't demand titles. I told myself consistency would be enough. And here she was, removing me with a sentence. He doesn't get a say. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was clarity. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I searched for doubt. For remorse. For the slightest flicker that she'd said something she didn't mean. There was none. So I closed my mouth. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for the stack of papers in front of me. Emergency contact information. Financial responsibility forms. Travel authorization agreements. My name was typed neatly in black ink. I took a pen. I drew a line through it. Not violently. Not dramatically, just a straight, steady line. "Remove me," I said. Laura's head snapped toward me. "Daniel, don't." I didn't raise my voice. "She's right. I don't get a say." The principal looked uncomfortable now, the professional mask slipping. "Mr. Hayes, perhaps we can?" "No," I interrupted calmly. "This is simple. If I am not a guardian, I should not be listed as financially or legally responsible." Chloe's jaw tightened. For the first time, her certainty wavered. Not because she regretted what she said, but because she hadn't anticipated consequence. Children rarely do. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. I felt something detach inside me, cord severed. For 6 years, I had entered every room as a man trying to prove he belonged, trying to show patience, trying to avoid being the controlling stepfather. Laura had asked me more than once not to escalate things, to let small comments slide, to not make Chloe feel pressured. So I swallowed it all. The comparisons to Ryan, the jokes about how I take things too seriously, the way conversations died when I entered a room, the subtle shift in tone when money was needed. I had convinced myself that endurance was love. But endurance without respect becomes humiliation. 10 minutes later, the principal asked the question that changed everything. "So who will be responsible now?" We were standing in the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, students walking past us, laughing, unaware of the fracture happening in that quiet corridor. Laura froze. Chloe stared at the floor. Ryan didn't answer his phone, and I said nothing, because the truth had already been spoken. Not by me, by Chloe. Status isn't emotional. It's structural. It's signatures, liability, obligation. If I don't get a say, I don't carry the weight. I walked out of that school building lighter than I had walked in. Not free, just empty. I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel and stared at the dashboard. I thought about the first time I met Chloe. She was 10, guarded, suspicious. I didn't try to replace her father. I just tried to be steady. I coached Mason's soccer team when no other parent volunteered. I drove Chloe to early morning practices. I stayed up late helping with projects. I fixed the leaking faucet in her bathroom without being asked. I filled gaps. And I told myself filling gaps would eventually make me permanent. But permanence cannot be built on tolerance alone. It requires acknowledgement. And that afternoon, in a room decorated with words like responsibility, I was informed I had none. When I pulled into our driveway later that day, the house looked the same. Solid, clean, stable. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shouting. I was done pretending. After the hallway went silent, nothing exploded. That was the strangest part. No screaming, no dramatic scene, just a quiet rearranging of gravity. On the drive home, Laura kept glancing at me like she was trying to measure the damage. Chloe stared out the window, earbuds in, already retreating into a world where I did not exist. I said nothing, because the truth was, the erasing hadn't started that day. It had been happening for years, slowly, methodically, like paint fading under the Texas sun. At first it was subtle. When I entered a room and conversations thinned. When Chloe would ask Laura for permission about something I had already answered. When Mason began checking his mother's face before responding to me. I told myself it was adjustment. Blended families take time. I was the outsider. I had to earn my ground. So I paid for the ground. I covered the tuition increases without comment. When extracurricular fees doubled, I didn't hesitate. When Chloe wanted to apply for an international exchange program, the expensive one, the prestigious one, I researched grants and deadlines like it was my own ambition on the line. I became efficient, reliable, quiet, a service provider. If a signature was needed, they called me. If money was short, they texted me. But if discipline was required, if authority was needed, suddenly I was overstepping. Chloe once told Laura I was too controlling because I asked for a curfew to be respected. Controlling. The man paying for the car insurance. Laura would pull me aside after arguments. "Daniel, please don't escalate. She's sensitive." She already feels like you're trying to replace Ryan. Replace him. Ryan, who appeared twice a year with sunglasses and apologies. Who sent transfers labeled, for the kids, that covered half of what was owed. Who posted filtered beach photos with captions about my world. I never tried to replace him. I just stayed. One night, about 6 months before the school meeting, I overheard Chloe on the phone with a friend. She didn't know I was in the hallway. He's just a sponsor with a superiority complex, she said, laughing softly. Sponsor. I stood there, frozen. Not stepdad. Not guardian. Not even Daniel. Sponsor. The word followed me for weeks. I kept paying. Because I believed consistency would eventually win respect. But respect doesn't grow where accountability is optional. After the school meeting, I didn't confront Chloe. I didn't punish her. I didn't deliver a speech about gratitude. I went home and opened my laptop. The exchange program deposit was due in 2 weeks. A substantial amount. The kind of payment that quietly rearranges a monthly budget. I drafted an email to the program coordinator. Please remove me as financial guarantor. I wrote. Simple. Professional. Then I logged into the school's parent portal and updated the billing contact information. Removed my name. Transferred responsibility to Laura. I didn't slam doors. I didn't announce it over dinner. I just stepped back. 3 days later, the principal called Laura. Tuition for the next quarter required confirmation of financial liability. The forms I had signed for years were no longer valid. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table. Laura looked exhausted. They need someone to sign, Daniel. This isn't the time to make a point. I'm not making a point, I replied calmly. Chloe already did. Chloe stood near the counter, arms crossed. Defensive. Silent. If I don't get a say, I continued, I shouldn't hold the liability. That's consistent. Laura's voice tightened. She didn't mean it like that. How did she mean it? No answer. Ryan didn't answer his phone that night either. For the first time, the structure trembled. Status isn't emotional. It's contractual. Without my signature, things stalled. The exchange program coordinator emailed asking for updated guarantor information. Chloe's tone shifted from indifference to irritation. You're really doing this? She asked me one evening. I'm aligning with your words, I said. This is petty. No, I replied. This is accurate. There's a difference. The school scheduled another meeting. This time, the atmosphere was colder. Administrative. Direct. The principal looked at Laura. We need clarity on who assumes financial and disciplinary responsibility moving forward. Laura's fingers tightened around her pen. Chloe stared at the table. I sat back in my chair, silent. The question wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was logistical. And logistics don't bend for feelings. Ryan was unreachable. Again. Laura whispered, We'll figure it out. But figuring it out meant something new now. It meant confronting the reality that I had been the structural beam holding up their expectations. When you remove a beam, the ceiling doesn't collapse immediately. Creaks first. That month, bills were separated. I paid the mortgage, utilities, insurance. But Chloe's car, the one I had purchased, was transferred into Laura's name. Insurance adjusted accordingly. Her phone plan shifted to prepaid. Not as punishment, as alignment. If I don't get a say, I don't carry the weight. Chloe accused me of getting revenge. I looked at her and said quietly, Revenge is emotional. This is administrative. She didn't like that answer, because it left no villain to fight. Only consequence. At school, the exchange program spot was eventually offered to another student. Without a financial guarantee, her application stalled. The first crack in her certainty appeared then. But I didn't celebrate it. I watched, because what I needed wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. Laura began receiving calls about attendance and minor infractions. The school no longer contacted me. For years, my phone had been the first to ring. Now it was silent. The house felt different, quieter, colder. Not because I withdrew affection, because I withdrew assumption. One evening, Laura said softly, "You've changed." "No," I replied. "I've clarified. There is a difference. For years, I had tried to earn a place through sacrifice. I believed patience was strength. But patience without boundaries becomes erasure. The school meeting hadn't created the fracture. It revealed it. And once you see clearly where you stand, you cannot pretend you don't. Chloe still moved through the house like a queen in exile. Proud, wounded, defiant. But for the first time, systems responded to reality. Forms required signatures. Programs required guarantors. Bills required payment. Words required backing. And mine were no longer on the line. I did not raise my voice. That's what Chloe expected. That's what Laura feared. An explosion. A lecture. A dramatic declaration of wounded pride. They got none of it. Instead, they got silence. And paperwork. The first real shift came with the car. Chloe had been driving the sedan I bought her the year she turned 16. Nothing extravagant. Safe. Reliable. Fully insured. Registered under my name because, at the time, I believed responsibility and authority were twins. If I carried the liability, I carried the say. After the meeting, I went to the DMV website and scheduled an appointment. 2 days later, I signed the title transfer. The vehicle moved into Laura's name. Insurance adjusted accordingly. Premium recalculated. My coverage reduced. When I handed Laura the updated documents, she stared at them as if they were written in a language she didn't understand. "You're really doing all of this?" she asked quietly. "I'm removing myself from positions I'm not allowed to hold," I replied. Chloe overheard. "This is so dramatic," she muttered. No, dramatic would have been yelling. This was structural. Her phone plan was next. I had bundled the family plan years ago to reduce cost. Efficiency disguised as care. I separated the line, converted it to prepaid under Laura's account. Again, no announcement, no speech, just alignment. The New York competition trip was the real turning point. Chloe had qualified months earlier. It required a financial guarantee, flights, hotel, event fees. I had signed the preliminary documents before the school meeting. Afterward, I emailed the coordinator. "I am withdrawing as guarantor," I wrote. Within a week, the school sent notice. Without confirmed financial backing, her participation could not be secured. That evening, Chloe confronted me in the kitchen. "You're ruining this for me," she said, voice tight. "I'm not ruining anything," I answered. "I'm respecting what you said. You're getting revenge because I embarrassed you." I looked at her carefully. "If I wanted revenge, you would know. This is consistency. You told the school I don't get a say. Authority and responsibility travel together. If I don't have one, I don't carry the other." Her jaw trembled, not with remorse, but with frustration. "You're acting like I said you're nothing." I held her gaze. "You said I'm not your dad and I don't get a say. That has meaning." Laura stepped in then, her voice strained. "Daniel, she's 16. She doesn't think in legal terms." "I'm not asking her to," I replied. "But I will." The bills began arriving addressed solely to Laura. Tuition reminders, program deadlines, insurance adjustments. For the first time in 6 years, my email inbox was quiet. And something strange happened. The house grew tense, but I did not. I paid the mortgage as always. Utilities, groceries, Mason's basic needs. I did not abandon the household. I simply stopped absorbing everything. Chloe's car insurance premium, now under Laura, was significantly higher. Laura hadn't anticipated that. Ryan sent a transfer that month. Less than half of what tuition required. The school called Laura about overdue balances. For the first time, I watched the system operate without my silent cushioning. There were no dramatic fights, just numbers. Reality is rarely loud. It is persistent. Chloe began spending more time in her room. Less defiance. More calculation. She started asking Laura questions about payment deadlines. About financial aid. One evening, she came into my office doorway. She didn't cross the threshold. "How do grants work?" she asked. No sarcasm. No edge. I leaned back in my chair. They require applications, I said. Income statements, sometimes essays. They're competitive. She hesitated. And financial responsibility forms? They determine who is legally accountable for tuition and conduct, I explained calmly. Schools require clarity. She absorbed that. Can you help me understand it? There it was. Not dad, not apology, but acknowledgement of competence. I didn't lecture. I didn't gloat. I walked her through it. Explained terms, deadlines, consequences. For the first time, she asked questions not as a challenger, but as someone seeking understanding. Mason noticed too. He began coming to me about homework again, about budgeting for a school trip. Not as a wallet, as an adult who understood how systems worked. Laura watched the shift with confusion. You're different with them, she said one night. No, I answered. They are, because something had changed. When comfort became conditional on clarity, respect began to form. Not affection, not warmth, respect. A month after the initial meeting, the school requested another parent conference. Tuition balances had been partially met, but instability remained. We sat in that same fluorescent hallway. This time, when the principal asked who would be responsible moving forward, Chloe looked at Laura, then at me. She didn't say I don't get a say. She said nothing, and silence in that moment was progress. I did not re-add my name immediately. I asked questions. I requested transparency. I clarified expectations. Authority had to be defined, not assumed. After the meeting, as we walked toward the parking lot, Chloe spoke quietly. I didn't think it would go like this. Words shape structures, I replied. She nodded. No tears, no dramatics, just understanding. The competition trip never happened. The exchange program spot was gone. Those losses were real, but so was the lesson. One evening, about 2 months later, we attended another school event. A smaller meeting. Routine. When a teacher approached and asked Chloe to introduce her parents, she hesitated just for a second. This is Daniel, she said. He helps me figure things out. Not dad, not sponsor. He helps me figure things out. It wasn't everything, but it was honest. And honesty warms a house more than forced titles ever could. I didn't close the door on them. I stopped being endless. I stopped absorbing disrespect as proof of love. And only then did something resembling balance begin to return. Tell me, was I cruel for letting reality teach what patience never could? Or was this the only language that would ever have been understood? There was no grand apology. No cinematic breakdown in the kitchen. No tears soaking into my shirt while someone whispered that they were wrong. Life doesn't resolve that cleanly. It adjusts. After the second school meeting, something in the house shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but in the way people pause before speaking. In the way doors close softer. In the way eyes hold contact half a second longer than before. Chloe stopped challenging me publicly. She didn't suddenly become affectionate. She didn't start calling me dad. But she began consulting me before making decisions that involved structure, applications, deadlines, commitments. The arrogance softened into calculation. One evening she sat across from me at the dining table, laptop open. I filled out the grant application, she said. Can you look at it? No edge in her tone. No accusation. Just a request. I read it carefully. Corrected a few financial disclosures. Explained how wording could affect approval. She listened without defensiveness. When she finished, she didn't thank me dramatically. She just said, okay. But her posture had changed. She no longer leaned back in dismissal. She leaned forward. Mason followed her lead in quieter ways. He began coming to me with practical questions, not just about school, but about life. Budgeting allowance. Understanding how car insurance works. Why credit scores matter. Before, I had been the background utility. Now I was a reference point. Laura watched all of this with a mixture of relief and discomfort. One night, after the kids were asleep, she sat across from me in the living room. You could have handled it differently, she said. Maybe, I replied. You scared her. I didn't raise my voice. No, she admitted. You didn't. We sat in silence for a while. I didn't realize how much you were carrying, she said finally. That sentence mattered more than Chloe's earlier one. Because for years I had carried quietly. Quiet carrying looks effortless from the outside. It looks automatic. It invites assumption. I had made it too easy for everyone to forget that I was choosing to shoulder the weight. I didn't want to compete with Ryan, I told her. I just wanted to be steady. You were, she said. Steady is invisible until it's removed. A month later, another school event took place. A smaller academic conference. Nothing dramatic. Just teachers discussing progress. We walked in together this time. Not out of obligation. Out of routine. When a counselor asked Chloe to introduce us, she didn't hesitate. This is my mom, Laura, she said first. Then she turned slightly toward me. And this is Daniel. He helps me make decisions. There was no emphasis. No awkwardness. Just acknowledgement. I didn't correct her. I didn't request a different title. It was enough. Because respect isn't in the label. It's in the posture. On the drive home, she asked me about internship options for the summer. Not in a demanding tone. In a collaborative one. What would you do? She asked. That question had been absent for years. What would you do? It wasn't about control. It was about guidance. And that was the only thing I had ever wanted. Back at the house, the air felt different. Not warmer because money was flowing again. I hadn't restored everything. We restructured some responsibilities. Clear agreements. Defined expectations. Shared liability. I didn't resume automatic payments blindly. We discussed them. Out loud. Authority was no longer assumed. It was articulated. One evening, I found Chloe in the kitchen alone. She was making tea. She hesitated before speaking. I didn't think about what it meant, she said quietly. What didn't you think about? Saying you don't get a say. I leaned against the counter. Words create boundaries, I said. Sometimes we don't realize how far they go. She nodded. I wasn't trying to erase you. But you did, I replied calmly. She swallowed. I know. That was the closest we came to an apology. And it was enough. Because growth isn't loud. It's subtle. It shows up in adjusted behavior, not dramatic confession. The house began to feel less transactional. Not because I gave more. Because I stopped giving automatically. When comfort stopped being unconditional, gratitude had space to grow. Laura stopped asking me to let things slide. Instead, she began reinforcing my position in front of the kids. Not aggressively, simply clearly. If Daniel sets a boundary, it stands, she told Mason once. Small sentence. Big shift. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated and protected. Months passed. The tension that once lived in the walls dissolved into something steadier. Chloe still had moments of teenage defiance. Mason still tested limits. Ryan still lived in Florida, sending partial transfers and filtered smiles. But the structure of our home was no longer built on silent sacrifice. It was built on defined roles. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, an ordinary night, nothing special, Chloe spoke about college plans. About staying in Texas. About internships. She looked at me directly. What do you think? Not as a challenge. As an invitation. And I answered. Because now I had a say. Not forced. Not assumed. Earned. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I stood in the hallway outside their rooms. The same hallway where months earlier I had felt erased. It didn't feel that way anymore. I hadn't reclaimed authority through volume. I had reclaimed it through withdrawal, through alignment, through allowing consequences to teach what lectures never could. I didn't close the door on them. I just stopped being an endless resource. And in that boundary, something honest began to grow. So I'll ask you this, was I wrong to step back when I was told I had no place? Or did respect only become possible once comfort had a cost?